Welcome on in, Browns fans, to another episode of the Dog Check podcast, airing weekly on Bally Sports Cleveland, and of course, part of the Bleav network of podcasts. Excited to be joined not only by the Browns legend that is Eric Metcalf, but also Pat Leonard, who is a Giants beat reporter for the New York Daily News and host of Talkin Ball here on the Bleav network. Pat, we appreciate you jumping in with us this week to get us ready for this big matchup in week 3 and dissect it from all bunch of different angles, man. Thank you so much.
You got it, Spencer. Great to be with you. Great to be with Eric. And I love the Dog Check name. It gets me in the mood to talk Browns and to talk football. I don't know what it is. I just like it.
You know, it's funny because we have so many of the hosts on around the network, and they're all kind of branded with like the Bleav in whatever the team might be. And then it always stands out to me like, man, ours is so different in that way. So I agree with you. It's a unique name. I like it for sure.
Yeah, put you in the mood to talk football.
Yeah, we're just checking in. Dogs checking in.
I like that. I like that, Eric. We're on to something there. We might have, hey, that's a good idea for a segment in the future. Like Browns, maybe I can use that for my mailbag. Dogs checking in.
The dog check-in of the week, right?
Look at that, Eric. Look at you, my man. You are on a roll today. Pat, I want to start. We know that obviously the Giants are off to a rough start to the season, and they have a number of different issues that we can kind of get into. But I actually want to highlight first, like, what are the things that Browns fans should be aware of that this team does well? Because, face value, everyone's going in like, oh, it's the Giants. We should beat them. Daniel Jones stinks. The spread's 6.5, whatever it might be. But I know there's also things that the Giants do well that could become problematic for the Browns. So what are some of those things that you're looking at for this matchup?
Well, the Giants are built to win with their pass rush if they get a lead in the game and they can unleash Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, and Kayvon Thibodeau. So Brian Burns, they traded a second-round pick for him and a 5th next year. They made him the 3rd highest paid pass rusher in football coming from Carolina. Dexter Lawrence, they made one of the higher paid defensive tackles in the game. He's also really widely considered by a lot of people now that Aaron Donald is gone, one of, if not the best nose tackles in football, rushes the passer and plays the run. And then Kayvon Thibodeau, number 5 overall pick a couple years ago by GM Joe Schoen. So that's where their pedigree is. So if they can get in a position where Cleveland is not running the ball well, controlling the clock well, and the Giants take a lead and Cleveland's in obvious passing situations in the second half, that would be problematic potentially for Deshaun Watson, Kevin Stefanski, and company, because that really is the Giants' recipe for success, is to either try to keep games close or get a marginal lead going late and then unleash their pass rush.
Yeah, they gave up 7 field goals or what have you. But I'm not trying to be funny. Is with that in mind, they have to feel good that they're not letting a team in the end zone, right? And so, so as a defense, so like you said, when you're leaning on a defense like this, they're doing their job. 7 is still a lot, but they're doing their job by not letting a team get in the end zone. So when you talk to these guys, how do they feel about that?
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I was laughing because, part of that point obviously is
let's be honest, a game that has that many field goals is always a little bit funny. We're all like, this is how they're scoring. Like the Steelers won week 1 doing that too. It's like
in regulation.
Yeah. Also because, like you said, like it really is bad with New York. For example, that was 7 possessions, 7 scores for Washington on the Giants defense. So, the point being, even though they have good pass rushers, they're not really getting it done. But to your point, Eric, when it got into the red zone, it was bend but don't break. They did benefit, though. Like the context of that would be Washington's offensive line false started. I'm not kidding. 5 times in the red zone in this game. And that was 2 on one drive and 3 on separate drives. So 4 different drives. Cliff Kingsbury's offense gets inside basically the 10 or 15 yard line and false starts. But to your point, Eric, what happens there is they were running the ball well. Their team false starts. Now it's 1st and 15. And now the Giants can rush the passer because Cliff Kingsbury feels like, okay, now I got to throw the ball. It's not an obvious run situation at 1st and goal from the 5. So that's a really kind of like a good example of don't put yourself in bad down and distance situation against the Giants. That's how they can beat you.
Yeah, those procedural things have been an issue for the Browns these first couple of weeks. So I Bleav, last I checked, lead the league in penalties to this point. So that's something for the Giants fans to know as well. On the other side of this, let's talk about, I guess, I don't even know if we can call it an elephant in the room anymore. I think it's pretty obvious that there's some debate to be had over Daniel Jones and the quarterback that he is. 2 years ago, it looked like Brian Daboll was the quarterback whisperer that everybody thought he was saving Daniel Jones's career, gets him the big contract. And now this year, it seems like not only is Daniel Jones feel like he's a sinking ship, but he's potentially taking Daboll with him. It looks like almost. Just what's kind of the situation there and the pulse on things. I think I kind of get a sense of where it is from the fan base side, but you can talk about that too. But more so in that building, like what is their confidence level in Daniel Jones to be the guy for this group?
Well, yeah, it's a very loaded conversation. You're right, obviously. I mean, when Bryce Young got benched by the Carolina Panthers yesterday, as we sit here and talk, I mean, there were a lot of people with betting slips probably of Daniel Jones to be the first benched quarterback who were surprised that it didn't cash in. I mean, that's really where it stands. When Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll got here, the plan was quietly, hey, let's go through the 2022 season with Daniel Jones, give him his best shot, give the team the best shot with limited cap space, limited resources, and not a very good roster. And then we're probably going to move on from there. We're probably going to have a high draft pick. So they make the playoffs at 9-7-1 that season. They have a late first round pick where they end up taking a corner. Deonte Banks are out of range of the quarterbacks. And then last year, it kind of all starts falling apart. Daniel Jones gets hurt, but the offense was terrible before that. But it wasn't just Daniel, right? It was a bad offensive line. It was injuries. It was infighting on the coaching staff and really a dysfunctional operation run by Daboll last year. And so now where that puts Daniel Jones is, okay, they paid him after that playoff season on a 4-year deal. They have the ability, though, Spencer, to get out of it at a reasonable dead cap hit in the following 2 years at the end of this season. The key, though, is if he gets hurt and can't pass a physical next March, there's a $23 million injury guarantee attached to his salary for next season.
Almost like Russell Wilson in Denver last year.
Right.
Very well said. And not only is that pertinent and something that's been discussed in New York a lot recently over the last, let's say, 8 months, but then let me tell you, Sunday morning when I'm on my way to the stadium at Washington versus Giants in Maryland, Adam Schefter puts out a report with a headline and a byline on it, reminding everyone Daniel Jones has this injury guarantee. Other coaches have been benched in similar or quarterbacks have been benched in similar situations. And so that's where we're at. We're at, okay, leaks now to remind everybody if this guy gets benched, here's why. Now, all of that said, he played better and played well at Washington. So week 1 against Minnesota was an absolute disaster, and the fan base basically booed him off the field as well as the team. But week 2, he was not the reason they lost. 3 touchdowns for the offense, 2 touchdown passes, and Malik Nabers, who had 18 targets and had a really good game, if he doesn't drop that 4th down pass from Daniel Jones in the red zone, and if Brian Daboll doesn't make a huge mistake, him and Joe Schoen not activating a replacement kicker for an injured kicker that they started the game with in Graham and Eric, then they win the game and they're 1-1. So that's where we're at. Daniel Jones up against it, but coming off a better game than he had in week 1.
Yeah, and to piggyback off the Brian Daboll thing, what has to happen for him to be there next year? What do you think record-wise they would have to prove to their fan base that they deserve to be there next year?
That's a really good question, Eric. I think, well, first, here's what I would say. Right now, they're the 2nd lowest scoring offense in the league, 12 points per game through 2 weeks. Last year, they were the 3rd lowest scoring offense in the league at 15.6. Brian Daboll got this job because he and Josh Allen together ran one of the best offenses in football together. That's why he's the coach, right? And so he has taken over play calling full-time this year after yo-yoing it back and forth last season from the offensive coordinator, Mike Kafka. So that was his kind of last resort. Here, I'm going to put my best foot forward. This is what I do best because, frankly, on the game management side of things, he hasn't excelled as well. So you asked about a record. I say first and foremost for Daboll, it is get the quarterback, the offense moving in the right direction. Pass protection, turnovers, but really just scoring points and getting in the end zone is number 1. Eric, I personally think that if you ask me about what record they need, I guess I would come down like last year, they were 6-11. I think if they are below that number, then I think he's out. I think right now, John Mara, the co-owner of the Giants, the thing he says every year now, he refuses to put a number on it. And I don't blame him for that. The thing he always says, though, is when I walk off the field at the end of the year, I want to believe and know that we are headed in the right direction. And so as you and I sit here right now, this goes for Joe Schoen too, general manager. Right now, the Giants have regressed from where they were 2 years ago, from where they were 3 years ago, from where they were last year. So really, throw the record out. They need to have a team that isn't, I mean, I'm sure you guys see it. You know, you're not in the New York area, but I could sit here and not tweet or say anything critical about the Giants. Nationally, they have really become a punchline. Daniel Jones is part of it. Daboll is part of it. But that has to change because you guys know, if the owners are opening the newspaper or opening their phone and a website or showing up to the stadium and seeing it half empty in the third quarter, that's what speaks loudest.
Would he have the chance to play almost, because I think this is the one sort of get out of jail free card that some coaches get.
Yeah.
Does he get to play the card of, hey, I never have actually had a chance to do this with my quarterback, like the quarterback that I selected, that I get to sort of build around? Because I feel like that is kind of the thing that a lot of these guys fall back on in those situations. Is that something that could be on the table for him? Or if Mara feels at the end of the season there is no sense of direction, he's just flat out gone and he doesn't get a chance to get that quarterback?
That's a really good question too. I think that's certainly a fair point for Daboll to make if he's in that spot.
Yeah.
I think Shane and Daboll, this comes down to how does ownership truly judge the re-signing of Jones, right? If behind the scenes, ownership was way more heavy-handed with that decision than anyone realizes, then it would be a fair point for Shane and Daboll to say, whoa, everybody in here knows we re-signed him because we knew you wanted him to. John Mara was on the phone with Daniel Jones in the final hour before he re-signed the deal, right? If that's the dynamic, then behind the scenes, maybe there's an unspoken handshake agreement on something like that. But from my understanding of my information, like Joe Shane was working as hard as anybody to bring Daniel Jones back and sign him to that $40 million a year contract. The Giants felt like coming off the playoff year last year was going to be a season where they turned into a contender, frankly. They were talking about it behind the scenes. Daboll actually wasn't happy when some players kind of put it out there. But really the rebuild became we're ready, here we go. So I think it's hard. It's going to be hard for him to say, I've had 3 years, but if it gets bad. They also, though, to your point, they were very aggressive, more aggressive than I have seen in years, about going all over the country, interviewing all these college quarterbacks, trying to get the rookie.
We saw that in Hard Knocks a little bit too. Yeah.
Oh, big time. Drake May, Jaden Daniels, those two guys on their radar. They knew they weren't going to get Daniels though, because he was going number 2. So it was really Drake May at 3. And then the Patriots didn't trade out, and that was that. So I don't think it's a crazy thing for the coach to come in and say that at the end. I would say also, Spencer, Mara and the Giants ownership, they do understand how ridiculous it is that they have fired their last 3 head coaches during or after their second season. And with this regime, they are trying as hard as ever in recent times with me covering them. I've covered them since 2016. They're trying as hard as ever to maintain consistency in their leadership. But, so that would be working in their favor. But, it just depends on how bad it gets.
We know how that goes in Cleveland sometimes.
Right, I was just about to say, have done it for years. I mean, Stefanski's probably been there, has the longest tenure of the last 4 or 5 coaches. And so we definitely understand that in Cleveland. So let's back to the field. What do you think the Giants have to do to come into Cleveland and get a victory this week?
They definitely have to stop the run on defense. 215 rushing yards for Washington. Brian Robinson Jr. kind of bullying them up front, big back. I'm actually pretty curious from your guys' end how you think the Browns, with Jerome Ford and with Nick Chubb out, could run the ball against the Giants and take advantage of that. Because if they can, I think it's just going to be a long day for the Giants, because I don't trust the Giants really to score a ton of points against this Browns defense. But if the Giants can stop the run and Cleveland's not as imposing on the ground, then the pass rush can get after Deshaun Watson and the play action plays become less effective. But, it's interesting. As much as I said the offense is a problem and they're the second lowest scoring team in the league, they're giving up 24.5 points per game through 2 weeks. That's 7th worst in the NFL. And so, to me, the recipe for the Giants in this game is stop the run, force Deshaun Watson into obvious passing situations. Their secondary is still suspect in New York, but do that. And then obviously I haven't mentioned his name yet, but continue to unlock Malik Nabers in the passing game. The number 6 overall pick out of LSU had 18 targets in that first game. And then also Devin Singletary at running back. Obviously, you guys and everybody knows the Saquon Barkley decision and conversation and the drama that went on. You saw it on Hard Knocks. Devin Singletary in week 1 didn't establish the running game, and the Giants had no answers for anything offensively. In Washington, they had Devin Singletary going for over 90 yards and a touchdown. He did have a costly fumble, but that established and protected Daniel Jones. The fact of the matter is a lot of quarterbacks, and Daniel's one of them, they need that running game to protect them. So that's how I see it folding from them. But I'm curious from your guys' angle, do you think with Ford and with their offensive line, from what you've seen, are the Browns the type of team that could take advantage of a bad run defense here?
Before we answer that, I'm going to let you know the Browns have yet to score 24 points.
Fair point.
And so they can feel good about that right now. But go ahead, Spencer.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, like, I think what's interesting about that is this offense has been advertised with Ken Dorsey coming in, who obviously was the successor to Brian Daboll in Buffalo, and he gets fired last year, comes in. Part of what's been advertised about this offense has been, well, hey, they're going to be passing a lot more. It's built around Deshaun Watson and what he does well and his strengths. But what was interesting was with David Njoku out last week, we saw them get into like these heavy sets where they had 2 extra linemen out there who reported as eligible, and they did that on the first play of the game. And then they mixed that in throughout the game. And there was a clear emphasis on, listen, we need to run the football better than we did in week 1 against Dallas. Let's make sure we do that. So you bring up, the sort of run game numbers and how that's been a bugaboo, if you will, for the Giants. That perks my ears up a little bit from the Browns angle, because it's like they just had a really good game. They rushed for 125 yards last week. It was kind of a mix between Foreman and Jerome Ford. And they were able to do that effectively. And I think that allowed the rest of the offense then to get comfortable and Deshaun to get comfortable. And then that freed him up to make some other plays and do some other things. So as much as they sort of have sold this thing as it's about Deshaun, we're going to pass a lot more, I think the run game is still super valuable to this Browns team if they're going to have success offensively, whether it's against the Giants or whether it's against anybody the rest of the season.
I think you make a great point there. It's interesting, like the Giants, if you look at the quarterbacks they played, Darnold and Daniels in Minnesota and Washington respectively, both quarterbacks have good games. Like I said, the Giants secondary, if the pass rush doesn't get there, is suspect. But the players of the game for both offenses the Giants have faced so far has been the running back. Aaron Jones for Minnesota, they just controlled it. The Giants defense was never able to get a handle on it. And you guys know Sam Darnold with play action turns into a different quarterback, right?
Yeah.
And then the same thing happened with Jaden Daniels in Washington. They couldn't stop Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson Jr., and it opened things up for the rookie number 2 overall pick out of LSU. So to me, that is, like, I would say the key of the game. Cleveland, especially hearing you say that really seemed beneficial for, kind of supporting and helping and taking some pressure off of Watson. To me, if Cleveland establishes that, you can send New York back on their plane right away.
Speaking of Deshaun, because he came up here in the conversation, is Deshaun Watson a quarterback? Because, back in the day, we know what he was. He led the league in passing. We continue to reference that in 2020. And that's, I think, the quarterback fans thought they were getting, but he hasn't really been there to this point. Is he a quarterback, though, whether it's around the league or specific to the Giants this weekend? Is he a quarterback that you think the Giants are worried about?
So, yes, I think that they understand that, like somebody said to me the other day, if Deshaun has played so poorly now in recent years, and, Daniel Jones is the one everybody's ripping on all these morning shows, how come people aren't ripping, like, on the field? Why aren't people ripping Deshaun the same way they're ripping Daniel Jones? And I said, well, I know it was a long time ago, but he has elite, like, top 3 quarterback play on tape in the NFL. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, so I know it was a longer time ago, and I know it was a different situation, different team, and before his life changed. But that is still there, right? Like, that tape still exists of him doing that to NFL defenses. So I think the Giants understand he's not the same player now, but they also know that that's there. And if they assume it's not, the Cleveland Browns have enough weapons. And also, like I said, their defense has struggled enough where it's like they can't take anybody for granted. So I don't think he's the key to them succeeding. Like, I I mean, Daboll was on a conference call with us on Monday after that game. And outside of Singletary's fumble on offense, all he was talking about for corrections was run fits, tackling, run defense, competitive stamina on defense. Like it was just bang, 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 all things that had to do with basically getting the ball shoved down your throat in the running game. So, there might be more opportunities even for Deshaun because they're so keyed on stopping the run. But yeah, they're definitely not taking him for granted. They can't afford to take anyone for granted right now.
Yeah, it's a situation where going into the Jacksonville game, I thought the Browns weren't physical on the line against the Cowboys. And I felt like they needed to go into Jacksonville and be physical and run the ball like you're saying they need to do against the Giants if they're hoping to win. That's the recipe. And so I think Deshaun isn't who he was a few years ago, but I don't think the Browns need him to be that. I think they need him to make winning plays when it's time. As long as you can run the ball effectively, then you always have those little flashes of Deshaun that can be that guy from the 2020 or whatever. 2019.
Yeah, Eric, that is a great point. Like they're going to win the game if he doesn't lose it for them, I think would be a really good way of putting it too. I think, and that really, to me, like the point you're making, I think is 100% true, which is that also just really falls on the game plan and not setting him up to fail. I mean, other than the run game, the other thing Washington was doing a lot, I don't know if you guys saw, but Jaden Daniels started that game 10 for 10 passing. And that was a week after Sam Darnold started 12 for 12 passing against the Giants. The difference, though, was Darnold was throwing the ball down the field. Daniels and Washington, though, they knew that not only was the Giants struggling tackling in the run game, if they just threw those bubble screens outside to the wide receivers and it's like a glorified running play, outside the Giants struggle with the tackling, almost like an extension of the run game as well. So even when Deshaun's dropping back to pass, that's where they should go.
Yeah, it's a good point. I'll be curious to see if the Browns work some of that into their sort of as an extension of the run game type stuff. And yeah, it's an interesting conversation because I know Deshaun's just not viewed the same way that obviously he used to be, but we'll see how that kind of comes to fruition this weekend. Pat, while I have you, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this question. Do the Giants regret not re-signing Saquon Barkley? I know he had that key drop on Monday night. I'm sure a lot of Giants fans were happy to see that happen, especially because it was the Eagles. But do you think, and all due respect to Devin Singletary, I know he's a solid player, but do you think they have any regrets about that as they don't really have an identity right now on offense and trying to sort of figure that out?
Oh, great point. The last point you made, I think, is the key, which is that they don't know what their identity is yet. And it's because he was their identity. And like I said, they did establish the run in week 2 without him. So you got a glimmer of, okay, maybe they can do it. But I'll just be totally honest. Washington's defense stinks. So it's hard to evaluate them against that team, but they do get credit for getting the yards. But the answer to your question is, I think that this is another reason why jobs are on the line for the general manager and the coach in New York, because ownership, you guys saw it, ownership did not want to lose Saquon.
Yeah.
And not only that, Joe Schoen was getting some advice from his lieutenants in the front office that getting rid of Saquon was maybe a bigger deal than he realized or thought, right? He had people telling him what his real value was going to be. He had John Mara's nephew, Tim McDonald, who's the director of player personnel of the organization, saying to him on camera, if we let Saquon go, what is our identity going to be on offense? Because Daniel needs a running game. I mean, it's right there, so yeah. I think they're not dwelling on it right now as far as how they're forming their team. And obviously they're trying their best to prove themselves right and the Eagles and Saquon wrong. But through 2 games, even though Saquon, obviously that was a costly drop. And to be honest, not paying him what he wanted in New York had to do with Joe Schoen believing he wasn't the receiver he thinks he is. So that, the Giants are watching that saying, told you so for a day. But he does have 2 receiving touchdowns in games. He has been the Eagles' best offensive player for 2 games. And the Giants are 1-8 against the Eagles and Cowboys in the last 2 years. So if that trend continues, like in week 6, if they come, I think it's week 6 or 7, when the Eagles come into MetLife Stadium, these are the kind of games where if it continues to go the way it looks like it's going and Saquon is churning while the Giants are not, it's just the story will write itself, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Wow. I when you just thinking about it, when it all went down, I was like, you can't be serious, but we know how everybody
Yeah.
devalues the running back. And so that's what it's about. You got to pay the quarterback and devalue the running back. And so it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense.
Right. And here, here's something I should have put in there too is, so the idea behind this season, and again, you saw this on Hard Knocks, but once they couldn't get the quarterback, they started to say, okay, it's about Daniel. And again, this is why it's really hard for them to say, I haven't had my guy, because this is now 2 straight years since the year they were supposedly going to move on from him that they've said, we're all in on Daniel. And the idea behind this season, Nabers is an example, was giving him his best weapons yet, his best line yet, finally protecting him, having guys on the outside and a true number 1 receiver. Let's see if he can earn the contract or not. The problem, though, is if you were really giving him his best chance, you would have found a way to have Saquon Barkley and Malik Nabers.
Yeah.
Like trading them out instead of adding one to the other, I think is going to be one of the headlines of, if this does crash and burn, that's going to be one of the headlines of saying, man, they really were pretty close to maybe doing this a little bit better, and they just, didn't do that.
Pat, I got one final question for you here in a second, but real quick, I do want to remind our listeners that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number 1 source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the game. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our 200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance for a weekly prize and share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to Online Casino and get in the game of blackjack or poker or online with one of our 150 slot machines. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online. The game starts here. Pat, final thing to get us out of here for this episode, which has been tremendous. Your insight's been absolutely awesome, and we appreciate it. It's just kind of an if statement. The Giants will win against the Browns on Sunday if
they stop the run and they run the ball. That's really what it comes down to. They stopped the run. They forced Deshaun Watson into obvious passing situations. And then on the offensive side, they run the ball, not only to move the ball and score points, but also to keep their defense off the field. They need to be able to control the game on their terms. And I should add this too. They also win if Brian Daboll, as the offensive play caller, and Shane Bowen, the defensive play caller, can out-scheme and out-coach, even if it's in certain situations, Kevin Stefanski, Jim Schwartz, Ken Dorsey. I personally think that without Wink Martindale now in New York, the Giants have lost that schematic advantage. And I have as high of an opinion of Stefanski as a schemer and game preparer as anybody in the league. So I think the Giants are really up against it there in a coaching battle and a coaching matchup. And so I think it has to be stop the run the ball, but also go toe-to-toe in a coaching matchup that looks lopsided in the Browns' favor.
Pat thinks this is the 90s. He says, stop the run and run the ball.
Old school football. Old school football.
This is what it's come to in New York, Eric. I don't know what else to say. I mean, that's where we're at.
Right.
He is Pat Leonard, does a tremendous job covering the New York Giants for the New York Daily News, and the host of Talkin Ball here as part of the Bleav network of podcasts. Pat, we are so thankful for your time, man. This was awesome. Really good preview and some insight into this team that's coming to town this week. And we hope to see you in town this weekend.
The dog check. Let's go. Thanks, guys.
Check in anytime.
For Pat, for Eric, who you guys know all too well, Browns fans, Browns legend. We'll be back next week with more Browns talk, of course, here on the Dog Check. Until then, enjoy the week. And as always, go Browns.